They'll tell you the Grand Canyon is the scar Earth shows after brushing shoulders with forever. Nice line for a postcard, right? Except on a moonless August night in 1998, two park rangers watched a silent amber disc glide over the south rim, hit the brakes mid-air, then drop straight down behind the cliffs. No boom, no running lights, just the sudden dead hush of their radios. Try fitting that on a postcard. For more than a century, the canyon's been leaking stories that don't belong in any museum display. Hopi elders call the Sipapu a doorway. Star people once guided their ancestors through it before heading home. Early pilot George H.W. Atkinson scribbled in his 1919 logbook about 3 silver lozenges pacing my Jenny for 12 minutes before going straight up. No prop wash, nothing. And modern hikers still come off the trail with phones full of lights that won't behave like aircraft or satellites or flares. Over the next 13 minutes, you'll hear from the folks who were standing closest when the sky cracked open. Rangers, pilots, river guides, even a geologist who swore she'd never use the word UFO in a sentence. Keep an open mind. The canyon doesn't reward certainty, just curiosity. Alicia Delgado had worked 8 summers on the South Rim and thought she'd seen every trick the dark could throw at her. At 2:14 AM, she was parked at Yaqui Point, half done with a mountain lion report, when the inside of her Crown Vic turned the colour of warm honey. I figured headlights, she says, voice still soft with wonder, but the light was above me, maybe 30 feet, perfect circle, no seams, no rivets, just this flawless amber surface. I couldn't hear a thing except my own heart trying to crawl out of my chest. The thing hovered, tour bus wide, for what felt like forever. She counted 17 seconds because her watch had frozen. Then it slid sideways, slipped past the rim, and fell straight down like the air had opened a trapdoor. The radio snapped back to life with a squawk. Alicia called it in at 2:19 AM under unknown aerial phenomenon. 10 miles west, 2 other rangers radioed the same amber light dropping out of sight. People always ask if I was scared, she says. I wasn't. I was mad. Like the canyon had changed the rules and forgot to send a memo. Alicia still patrols that stretch with the windows down, listening. 3 nights later, river guide Marcus Alvarez was on a sandbar 8 miles upstream from Phantom Ranch. At 11:07 PM, he stepped out to tighten the raft lines and glanced upriver. Orange ball, low, maybe 200 feet, moving upstream against the wind, he says. I've seen flares, drones, swamp gas. This wasn't any of that. It blinked once, polite as you please, and popped into 3 identical orbs. They spun around each other like minnows, shot over my head, and vanished past the North Rim. 6 clients were awake. 4 wrote their own statements, later filed with MUFON as case number 980824. The investigators ruled out drones, no rotors, no FAA lights, speed well beyond 1998 battery tech. That same week, hikers on the Kaibab Trail reported silent orange globes pacing us for a mile. All sightings clustered around the new moon, when the canyon is nothing but starlight and echo. Dr. Lainey Hart spent 10 years cataloguing Grand Canyon anomalies. She's the kind of physicist who flinches at the word alien, the way biologists flinch at miracle. The flight dynamics are the smoking gun, she says, pointing to a map splotched with 247 dots since 1950. Instant stops, right angle turns at 800 knots, acceleration without a pressure wave. Our best recon drones would leave a trail of toasted electronics trying to keep up. Overlay a topo map and the lights hug the ridgelines like they're reading the rock strata. 2 theories: the canyon's laced with uranium and quartz layers that play havoc with instrumentation, or the place is just dark enough, empty enough, and popular enough to be an ideal playground for anything that doesn't want to be caught. Captain Greg Holloway flew turboprops, ferrying Vegas tourists to Grand Canyon Airport. On a dusk approach, 7:42 PM, 7,500 feet, tower cleared him for runway 3. I glance left and there it is. Classic disc, metallic, no wings, no tail, maybe half a mile off, he says, hands still sketching the sky over coffee. I radio tower thinking it's unannounced traffic. Controller comes back. Captain, we have no radar contact in your vicinity too. The object matched his 180 knot ground speed, then shot forward and vanished. His instruments went berserk, GPS dropped, transponder flickered, even the whiskey compass spun like a kid's toy. He filed a NASA ASRS report. No reply ever came. That night on the ramp, a rival airline fueler pulled him aside with a grainy phone pic. Same craft above the control tower 20 minutes earlier. Manager had told him to delete it. He didn't. Dr. Maya Patel was mapping uranium near Torawep in 2015 when a bright white light appeared above the cliff opposite her camp. Figured it was the university's drone survey, she laughs, except the light looped, dropped into the canyon like a stone, then rocketed straight back up. No drone I know has that thrust to weight ratio. She caught 7 seconds on a field tablet, shaky footage of a luminous orb screaming past at impossible speed. A JPL colleague emailed back, propulsion unknown, suggest you keep this to yourself. Maya still won't say UFO, but she'll shrug and tell you, I study rocks that remember millions of years. Maybe the canyon's just learning how to check its own library cards. Between April 15th and May 3rd, 2019, the National UFO Reporting Center logged 42 submissions for the Grand Canyon region. The stories matched: silent triangles, bright orbs, sudden vanishings. The standout came from a commercial rafting party of 22 people who saw a black triangle glide over the river, stop overhead, pivot like a door on hinges, then accelerate straight up. Retired teacher Elaine Brooks hit record on her phone. It's like someone cut a perfect triangle out of the night sky and forgot to paint it back in. Her audio and sketch made local news, then slipped into the internet's white noise. After 24 interviews, patterns surface. Sightings spike during new moons and geomagnetic storms. Craft avoid the village, preferring the inner gorge's dark corridors. Photos never show propulsion exhaust or windows, just smooth hulls and lights that feel deliberate, like commas in a language we're still sounding out. Elder Thomas Humayastua only speaks after sundown when the spirits are awake. We sat on a sandstone slab overlooking First Mesa. Our ancestors say the star people came when the world was soft, he says. They taught us planting songs, then left through the Sipapu, the doorway in the Grand Canyon. Every so often they check the locks. He won't say UFO, the word is too small. His granddaughter nods. She saw 3 blue orbs spin above Lipan Point last summer. Asked why tourists see more now, the old man smiles. Phones. Before, only the wind told the story. Now the wind has backup singers. Captain Holloway didn't think lightning struck twice until 3 years later. Same Vegas Canyon run. This time the craft was smaller, wingless, hovering so close he caught a faint grid pattern on its underside. I flashed the landing lights twice. Quick, it tilted like a nod, then zipped away, and my digital watch was 10 minutes slow. Checked against the cockpit clock, 10 minutes gone. Pilot's watches don't lose time. Greg keeps a log now. Date, latitude, longitude. 2 new entries and counting. Alicia Delgado transferred to the North Rim. Higher, darker, quieter. On her last South Rim patrol, she left a single LED lantern on the overlook at Yaqui Point. Call it a nightlight, she jokes, just in case the visitor comes back. I want them to know someone noticed. She still carries the original incident report, soft and creased. At the bottom, in red pen, unexplained, file closed. She never signed off. The Grand Canyon is a masterclass in humility. 2 billion years of rock stacked like overdue library books, a river still scribbling in the margins. Yet for all that ancient weight, the strangest stories fall from above, not below. Over 300 documented encounters, dozens of corroborated sightings, 0 press conferences. Maybe they're classified drones, maybe they're Venus on a bender, or maybe the Hopi elders are right and the star people return to a doorway we paved right over. Either way, every new moon, somebody stays past sunset, looks up, and realises the sky over the canyon feels less like empty space and more like a lobby with the lights left on. So, pack a chair, a warm drink, and patience. The lights don't take requests, but they've been showing up quiet, luminous, impossible, long before any of us had cameras to prove it. If you've witnessed something, tell us below. The canyon keeps its secrets, but it also keeps receipts. Next week, we're heading to the Winter Basin, where ranchers report cattle that vanish into thin air. Until then, keep looking up. The story begins in the heart of a Canadian winter in November of 1930. We're in the vast, unforgiving landscape of the Northwest Territories, a place where the wind is the only architect and snow is the only certainty. A man, a trapper named Joe LaBelle, is urging his dog's sled forward. The air is so cold it bites at any exposed skin, and his own breath has frosted his hood into a spectral white halo. For 10 long winters, this has been his routine. He's a familiar face along the western shore of Anjikuni Lake, trading tea, ammunition, and stories with the Kainamute people who make their camp there. Tonight, as the pale sun dips below the horizon, he's not just seeking trade, he's seeking warmth, community. He's dreaming of freshly cooked bannock, of shared laughter that steams in the frigid air, of a mug of something hot cupped in his freezing hands. Instead of warmth, he walks into a silence so profound, it's like a physical blow. The scene he stumbles upon is a portrait of life interrupted. 30 skin tents, the homes of an entire community, stand empty, their flaps snapping in the relentless wind like ghost flags on a forgotten battlefield. The signs of recent life are everywhere, and they are chilling. A pot of caribou stew still glugs and bubbles over a bed of dying coals. A pair of handmade mitts left out to dry drip water that freezes mid-air, but it's the dogs that truly stop his heart. 39 sled dogs, the lifeblood of any northern community, lie chained at the edge of the camp. Their ribs show through their thick fur, a testament to days of hunger, yet they are unnervingly calm, as silent as monks in meditation. There are no footprints leading away from the camp, no signs of a struggle, no voices carried on the wind. There is only the ringing hush that echoes in your ears after the sudden blast of a gunshot. Here, 900 kilometers from the nearest road, an entire village of men, women and children has, quite simply, stepped off the map. Joe LaBelle's personal diary, which would later be splashed across the pages of the Halifax Herald and ignite a national sensation, captures the rising panic of that moment. He wrote that he hollered their names until his throat was raw and bleeding, the sound swallowed by the immense indifferent tundra. Then, with dread coiling in his gut, he began a methodical search, ducking into every single tent. The scene inside each one only deepened the mystery. Bedding was smoothed, not thrown aside in haste. Kettles, recently filled, were still steaming gently over cold fires. In one tent, a woman's sealskin garment lay unfinished, a bone needle frozen mid-stitch, as if she had just set it down to step outside for a moment. Every logical explanation died on his lips. Was it famine? Impossible. The camp's meat cache was full, holding over 60 kilos of dried caribou, more than enough to last. Was it a sudden, virulent disease? Unlikely. There were no bodies, no signs of sickness, no freshly cut graves in the iron-hard permafrost. Speaking of graves, even the village's small ancestral graveyard looked wrong. The traditional stone piles marking the resting places had been disturbed, rolled aside. The coffins beneath had been opened, their contents exposed to the elements, yet the bones within lay completely untouched. It made no sense. Wolves and other scavengers in the barrens will avoid human remains, sure, but why would anyone take the time to rifle through graves, yet ignore the free meal of the starving sled dogs? It was then that true panic finally sank its teeth into Joe LaBelle. He sprinted back to his sled, his own dogs lunging in confusion, and mushed for 46 frantic, non-stop kilometers to the nearest telegraph shack at Enadai Lake. His message, tapped out into the ether, was the stuff of winter nightmares. Anjikuni deserted, no tracks, need Mounties. On December 3rd, a 3-man patrol of the Royal Canadian Mounted Police, led by Constable J. Nelson, badge number 8721, arrived to investigate. The official RCMP files, finally declassified and released in 1999, confirmed the skeletal basics of LaBelle's report. They found an empty camp, no signs of a struggle, and live dogs that had been starved for several days. After that, the official record becomes as thin as breath on -40-degree air. The paperwork seems to vanish. There are no official photographs of the scene, no signed witness statements beyond the initial report from Joe. The Mounties conducted a thorough search, sweeping a 2-kilometre perimeter around the camp, finding absolutely nothing. Their bloodhounds, expert trackers, were useless. The dogs reportedly refused to even pick up a scent, just quivering and whining at the edge of the silent village. In the Arctic, any trail older than half a day is easily dusted over by drifting snow, erasing any hope of tracking the villagers. Frustrated and without leads, Constable Nelson wired his superiors in Ottawa. His official report concluded no evidence of crime. Villagers have possibly migrated. The response from headquarters was swift and decisive. Close file. Return within a single week, the Mounties had pulled out. The mystery of Anjikuni Lake was officially closed, and the site sank back into a profound silence that would last for 50 years. But history and newspapers detest a vacuum. In February of 1931, the story broke, and a headline in the Winnipeg Evening Tribune, Ghost Town of the Barrens, tripled the paper's sales overnight. With no official answers, rumours bloomed like intricate frost flowers on a window pane. The theories were wild and imaginative, each more sensational than the last. Whispers spoke of aliens descending in ships of blue light, of ancient Viking curses awakened from the permafrost, and even of Soviet kidnappers testing a new silent nerve gas on an isolated population. The legend was supercharged in 1959 by the best-selling author Frank Edwards. In his book Stranger Than Science, he added a compelling new detail to the story: a queer violet halo rippling across the sky seen by trappers in the area on the night of the disappearance. In 1975, Fate magazine, a publication dedicated to the paranormal, pegged Anjikuni Lake as a kind of cosmic truck stop, a designated portal for extraterrestrial visitors. Local Inuit elders, when asked, swapped their own chilling tales of the Kalupalik, ancient sea ogres said to snatch misbehaving children through breathing holes in the ice. With every single retelling, the story inflated. The village population grew from 30 people to 50, then to 120. The number of dogs doubled. The simple stew on the fire morphed into sizzling caribou steaks. North of the tree line, there were no fact checkers. The snow was simply too deep for skeptical editors to make the journey. It's time to trade the crackling campfire for the cold, hard glare of a headlamp. When you start digging into the details, the grand mystery begins to show some cracks. First snag, the official 1930 Canadian census lists no village named Anjikuni. The closest name is Angikuni, which was known not as a permanent village, but as a seasonal fishing and hunting spot used by maybe a dozen, not 30, Kainamiut families. Second snag, the hero of our story, Joe LaBelle. Records from the Hudson's Bay Company show he did trade fur in the region, certainly, but they also show he was known for bootlegging rock gut whiskey along the Churchill River. Furthermore, court documents from 1928 show he declared bankruptcy in Prince Albert, Saskatchewan, owing his creditors thousands of dollars. A man bleeding money and desperate to disappear might have a motive for inventing a ghost village to throw creditors off his trail. Yet to pull off such a hoax, you would need accomplices, elaborate props, and nerves of solid glacier ice. Third snag, those disturbed coffins. Inuit living on the Barrens in the 1930s rarely, if ever, dug deep graves in the permafrost. The traditional practice was to wrap bodies in skins and leave them on the open tundra during the summer. A tidy cemetery with buried coffins screams of a European style, making its presence out here highly unlikely. Fourth, and perhaps the biggest snag, a statement made years later by Corporal A.H. Joy, one of the original Mounties on the scene. He told the Calgary Herald, "We found a few empty tents, one dead dog, nothing mystical. One dead dog, not 39 starving but living ones. The file," he shrugged, "was routine until the writers got hold of it." His statement offers a chillingly simple translation. The mystery may be less about a vanishing of people and more about a vanishing of nuance and fact. Even if we dismiss the most sensational details, What could explain an abandoned camp? Arctic historian Sheila Grant proposes a perfect storm of mundane crises. Perhaps the caribou herds, the primary food source, suddenly changed their migration route. An early, severe freeze could have made hunting impossible. In this scenario, the families might have made a desperate bolt for the nearest Hudson's Bay trading post, dumping heavy gear like pots and tents to lighten their sleds for a desperate race for survival. Yet, this theory hits a major wall. Experienced elders would never, under any circumstances, abandon live sled dogs. Dogs weren't pets, they were capital on 4 paws, your engine, your life insurance in the Arctic. What about influenza? Historical outbreaks in isolated northern communities were devastating, leaving behind scorched tents and discarded clothing, but they also left bodies. Anjikuni had none. How about a geomagnetic hiccup? This theory has legs. The North Magnetic Pole was hovering very near the region in 1930. A severe geomagnetic storm can cause compass needles to spin wildly, confuse animal behaviour, and spark auroras so intense they can look like motherships descending from the heavens. Could such a terrifying and disorienting event scare an entire camp into fleeing? Maybe, but you don't flee a threat, natural or otherwise, without your rifle, and you don't leave a perfectly good pot of stew behind. Survival in this landscape depends entirely on resources like seal oil and caribou skin. To ditch both is not just illogical, it's suicide. We're left circling the simplest answer, mass relocation, that keeps smacking directly into the hard wall of cultural logic. Humans are fundamentally pattern-seeking creatures, and we have a PhD in dread. A blank spot on a map where children once played and families once lived unsettles us on a primal level, far more than any named tragedy. When you toss in the elements of eternal night, blinding snow, and a frustrating official silence from authorities, our imagination rushes in to fill that terrifying void. Psychologists call this phenomenon negativity bias. Threatening or mysterious information sticks in our brains, while benign, logical facts tend to slide right off. Add to this the factor of colonial distance. For readers in southern Canada or the United States, the Inuit were often pictured not as real people, but as mystical Eskimos, snow elves living in a world apart. This exoticism made any fantastic tale not just believable, but preferable to a mundane truth. The story detached from reality like an iceberg carving from a glacier. Every decade seems to need its own lost city of Atlantis. Anjikuni became Canada's. UFO buffs love the wide, lonely sky, where one unexplained light feels like definitive proof of galactic pit stops. Inuit spirit lore, filled with shapeshifters and land spirits, merges seamlessly with the narrative because the tundra was already seen as a place teeming with the supernatural. Roll it all together and you get a perfect narrative snowball, a tiny core of a possible real event, packed thick with sensational slush until the original seed is completely obscured. The legend has refused to be freeze-dried by time. In 1995, the popular TV show History Channel's Vanishings replayed the most dramatic version of the events, complete with the stew still warm, to an audience of 3 million viewers. In 2018, an indie horror flick titled Kalupalik doubled its Kickstarter goal by promising to tell the truth north of 60. On the internet, Reddit threads endlessly dissect magnetic anomalies and old newspaper clippings, while TikTokers cosplay as starving huskies, reenacting the eerie scene for a new generation. Each retelling drifts farther and farther from Joe LaBelle's original desperate telegram, yet the fundamental hook holds us tight. What if your home, your entire world, emptied overnight? That fear is universal. The geography is irrelevant. Anjikuni survives not as census data or a police file, but as a dark mirror reflecting whatever scares us most in any given era. Aliens, government silence, climate catastrophe, or simply the chilling possibility that we too could vanish without an epitaph. In July of 2019, a small team of archaeologists from the University of Manitoba arrived to bring modern science to the old mystery. 5 snowmobiles buzzed across the tundra, carrying ground-penetrating radar and other advanced equipment. The radar did indeed map the remains of old fire hearths and tent rings, evidence of a past settlement, but the carbon dating told a different story. The sites were last used around 1850, not 1930. Critically, the team found no bullets, no tin cans, no glass beads, the common trade goods that would have been everywhere in a camp from the 1930s. They found one partial dog skeleton, bleached white by the sun and wind, its bones gnawed. Was it Wolverine's? Or just the slow, steady work of time? Nobody could say for sure. The bottom line was stark. The physical evidence for a busy, populated village at Anjakuni Lake in November 1930 is still completely missing in action. The land itself is quiet, so quiet it hums. So, after all this, what scores highest on the plausibility meter? Let's break it down. Mass migration due to famine or a sudden freeze seems possible at first, but the abandonment of essential tools and most importantly the dogs makes it culturally nonsensical. It scores a 3 out of 10. A sudden disease outbreak gets a 2 out of 10. It's a valid threat, but the complete lack of bodies makes it a poor fit for the evidence. The theory of a geomagnetic panic is more compelling. It explains the potential for confusion and fear, but not the abandoned gear. We'll give it a 4 out of 10. A deliberate hoax by a financially ruined Joe LaBelle is a strong contender at 7 out of 10. His motives are clear and many details seem exaggerated, yet it would have been a complex deception to orchestrate. This leaves us with folklore inflation, which scores a solid 8 out of 10. The core story of an empty seasonal camp, perhaps found by LaBelle and reported with some alarm, provides the perfect seed for a legend that grew fatter and more fantastic with every winter and every retelling. And aliens? With zero proof and a heavy dose of wishful thinking, that's a 1 out of 10. The math points overwhelmingly toward a mundane core, a small seasonal camp, likely already empty for the winter, that was wrapped in an ever-expanding fleece of myth. Is the mystery solved? Not quite. Because numbers and scores can't fully erase the powerful images the story creates. That single starved dog, the Mounties' terse and dismissive telegram, or the way your own pulse jumps when you picture deserted snow huts glowing under the eerie light of the aurora. The facts may quiet the story, but they don't quite kill it. I grew up in Winnipeg, where the winters are long and dark. I remember being glued to late night AM radio shows. Every time a blizzard caused a power outage, plunging the city into darkness, the host would fill the dead air with the chilling tale of the vanished village of Anjakuni. The kid version of me drew crayon pictures of UFOs beaming up unsuspecting hunters into a purple sky. The adult version of me now chases footnotes through dusty archives, trying to separate fact from fiction. In a way, both of those versions still share a bunk in my head. A part of me wants the RCMP files to be wrong, wants the tundra to be hiding some profound cosmic answer, because mystery often tastes so much better than simple statistics. Yet, the historian in me must admit, the bolder the claim, the thinner the paper trail. The enduring lesson of Anjakuni Lake is that sometimes I don't know is the most honest, and in its own way, the most haunting sentence in any language. The North is an expert at swallowing sound, at erasing tracks. Whole caravans have disappeared into whiteouts, bones are scattered by scavengers, and paper records burn for warmth at 50 below. Maybe the only thing we ever truly retrieve from the emptiness is the story we tell ourselves about it. If you've stuck around this long, you are my kind of curious. Share this with that friend of yours who swears aliens built the CN Tower, hit the like button, so the algorithm knows I'm still alive. And always remember, the truth is out there, but the trail might just be drifted over by morning. In 1922, the discovery of King Tutankhamun's tomb was a global sensation, a treasure chest sealed for over 3,000 years. But as the world watched in awe, a dark legend began to form. One by one, people connected to the tomb started dying in strange and mysterious ways. Was it just a string of bad luck? or had they truly unleashed the curse of the pharaohs? Today, we're separating the fact from the fiction in the chilling story of King Tut's tomb. Picture it, 1922. The world is healing from the Great War, and it's hungry for adventure. In Egypt's Valley of the Kings, a sun-baked landscape of royal graves, a stubborn British archaeologist named Howard Carter is on a quest that's eaten up nearly a decade of his life. For years, Carter had been hunting for the tomb of a little-known boy king, Tutankhamun. The whole operation was bankrolled by his patron, the wealthy aristocrat George Herbert, the 5th Earl of Carnarvon. By 1922, Lord Carnarvon was losing his patience. He'd sunk a fortune into the Egyptian desert with little to show for it, and gave Carter one last season to find this phantom tomb. Carter zeroed in on a patch of ground near another pharaoh's tomb, an area everyone else had ignored because it was buried under the ruins of ancient workers' huts. He just had a feeling something important was down there, and boy, was he about to be proven right. On November 4th, 1922, a water boy on the dig crew literally stumbled upon a step carved into the rock. Carter and his team went into a frenzy, clearing away the rubble to reveal a full staircase leading down into the earth. At the bottom, a sealed doorway. It had been breached in antiquity, but the seals hinted that most of it was still intact. Carter shot off a telegram to Lord Carnarvon in England. At last, have made wonderful discovery in Valley, a magnificent tomb with seals intact, recovered, same for your arrival, congratulations. Carnarvon rushed to Egypt, arriving over 2 weeks later. On November 26, 1922, with Carnarvon and his daughter, Lady Evelyn Herbert, watching over his shoulder, Carter stood at a second sealed door. He carefully chiselled a small hole in the corner, lit a candle, and peered into the blackness. A rush of hot air, trapped for 3 millennia, snuffed out the flame. For a moment he was speechless. "Can you see anything?" Lord Carnarvon asked, practically vibrating with anticipation. Carter, his voice trembling, managed just 3 words that would become legendary. "Yes, wonderful things." What Carter saw in that flickering candlelight was almost too much to process. The first chamber was crammed floor to ceiling with golden couches shaped like mythical animals, gleaming alabaster vases, dismantled chariots, and towering statues of the king standing guard. And gold was everywhere. This was just the antechamber. The tomb, known as K562, was made up of 4 small rooms, but they were packed with more than 5,300 artifacts. It was the most complete royal Egyptian tomb ever found. While it looked like it had been robbed twice right after the burial, the thieves were apparently caught, and the tomb was resealed, preserving its incredible contents for the next 3,300 years. The excavation itself was a massive undertaking that would take Carter and his team a full decade to finish. Every single object had to be photographed, catalogued, and carefully conserved. The world was mesmerised. Photos revealed the stunning riches of Tut's court, fine linens, complex board games, and even a lock of his grandmother's hair. One of the most breathtaking pieces was a gilded throne showing a touching scene of the young king with his wife Ankhesenamun. Carter called it the most beautiful thing that has yet been found in Egypt. But the real prize was in the burial chamber. There, a set of huge gilded shrines, nested one inside the other, protected the king's sarcophagus. Inside that sarcophagus were 3 coffins, each one shaped like the pharaoh. The first 2 were gilded wood, but the last one was staggering. It was made of over 110 kilograms of solid gold. When Carter lifted the lid, the world saw the face that would become an icon, the magnificent funerary mask of Tutankhamun, made of solid gold and inlaid with brilliant blue lapis lazuli. It showed the boy king with a peaceful, eternal expression. The discovery turned Tutankhamun from a forgotten pharaoh into a global celebrity. But as the archaeologists celebrated, a darker story began to spread. This was no longer just about treasure, it was about a curse. The whole idea of a curse of the pharaohs wasn't new. It was a spooky, romantic tale loved by fiction writers. And while some ancient tombs did have inscriptions threatening anyone who disturbed them, no official written curse was ever found in Tutankhamun's tomb. But that didn't stop a new one from being born. The press, always hungry for a good story, jumped on every weird event. The first omen supposedly happened the day the tomb was opened. Carter's pet canary was allegedly eaten by a cobra, the very symbol of pharaonic power. A great story, but it was just the opening act. The first and most famous victim was the man who paid for it all, Lord Carnarvon. Just a few months after entering the tomb, in March 1923, Carnarvon was bitten by a mosquito on his cheek. Later, he nicked the bite while shaving. The wound got infected, and he developed sepsis. On April 5th, 1923, he died in his Cairo hotel. His death could have been written off as a tragic accident, but the stories around it were just too good for the media to ignore. It was reported that at the exact moment Carnarvon died, all the lights in Cairo went out. At the same time, back on his estate in England, his dog Susie supposedly let out a howl and dropped dead. These details were almost certainly exaggerated. Blackouts in Cairo were common, and the dog reportedly died hours later, but they created a narrative that was impossible to resist. The press went wild. Weeks earlier, a popular novelist had warned that dire punishment would follow anyone who entered a sealed tomb. Now it looked like she was right. Sir Arthur Conan Doyle, the creator of Sherlock Holmes and a believer in spiritualism, publicly suggested Carnarvon wasn't killed by an infection, but by elementals created by ancient priests to guard the king. The curse was no longer a myth, it was a headline, and it was just getting started. After Lord Carnarvon's dramatic end, the curse's victim list started to grow, at least according to the papers. Any death or misfortune even loosely connected to the dig was attributed to the boy king's revenge. Just 5 months after Carnarvon died, his half-brother, Aubrey Herbert, died in September 1923. Suffering from a degenerative eye condition, he was advised to have all his teeth removed. He died of sepsis from the surgery, the same thing that killed his brother. The curse seemed to follow visitors too. George J. Gould, a wealthy American, visited the tomb in 1923 and died from pneumonia shortly after. Prince Ali Kamel Fahmy Bey of Egypt toured the tomb and was shot and killed by his wife less than a year later. Even those who handled the artifacts weren't safe. Arthur Mace, one of Carter's team members, died in 1928 from pneumonia. The stories got wilder. An archaeologist named Hugh Evelyn White, who supposedly helped with the excavation, took his own life in 1924, leaving a note allegedly written in his own blood that said, "I have succumbed to a curse which forces me to disappear." A radiologist who x-rayed the mummy, Sir Archibald Douglas Reed, died from a mysterious illness. Howard Carter's secretary, Richard Bethel, was found smothered in his bed in 1929. The press even reported that when Carter's friend, Sir Bruce Ingram, was given a paperweight made from a mummified hand, his house promptly burned down. By the end of the 1920s, newspapers had linked over a dozen deaths to the curse. The public was hooked on this macabre tale. It was far more exciting than dusty archaeology, but behind the spooky headlines, a very different truth was waiting, one based on science, logic, and simple facts. While the world was obsessed with the supernatural drama, scientists and skeptics started looking for more logical explanations. And when you look at it in the cold light of day, the whole curse legend starts to fall apart. First, let's talk numbers. One study showed that, of the 58 people present when the tomb and sarcophagus were opened, only 8 died within the next 12 years. If there was a curse, it was incredibly selective. In fact, Lord Carnarvon's daughter, Lady Evelyn Herbert, was one of the very first people inside the tomb. She lived for another 57 years, dying in 1980 at the age of 78. So what about the deaths that did happen? Carnarvon's death is easily explained. He died from sepsis caused by an infected mosquito bite, which led to pneumonia. In a world before antibiotics, that was tragically common. Plus, Carnarvon was already in poor health after a bad car accident years earlier, which weakened his immune system. But what about the others? One of the most popular scientific theories is the tomb toxin idea. The thinking is that a tomb sealed for 3,000 years could be a petri petri dish for nasty pathogens. The mummy and food offerings could have harboured ancient toxic moulds like aspergillus, which can cause serious lung infections, especially in people with weakened immune systems. Some have pointed out that the fever and pneumonia-like symptoms several victims had are consistent with this. However, many experts are sceptical of this too. They argue it's unlikely a microbe could lie dormant for millennia and then suddenly become deadly. One epidemiologist even pointed out that with the sanitation standards in 1920s Egypt, Lord Carnarvon was probably safer inside the tomb than outside. A more recent theory suggests the cause could have been radiation. Some researchers have proposed that naturally occurring uranium in the tomb's building materials could have led to radiation exposure, possibly causing cancers and other illnesses over time. Studies have found higher than normal radiation levels at other ancient Egyptian sites, lending some credibility to the idea. In the end, the most likely explanation for the curse is a perfect storm of tragic coincidences: the poor health of some individuals, the limited medicine of the 1920s, and a media machine that knew a supernatural story would sell papers. The real mystery isn't the curse itself, but how the legend managed to completely overshadow the truth. While everyone was distracted by a phantom curse, a very real desecration was happening inside the tomb. And it wasn't by ancient spirits but by the archaeologists themselves. For all his careful cataloguing, Howard Carter's handling of Tutankhamun's body was, to put it mildly, brutal. When Carter's team finally got to the solid gold coffin in 1925, they hit a snag. The sacred oils and resins poured over the mummy had hardened into a rock-solid glue, sticking Tutankhamun's body to the bottom of the coffin. Carter wrote that no amount of legitimate force could get it out. First, they tried leaving the coffin out in the blistering Egyptian sun, hoping the heat would melt the resin. It didn't work. What happened next was a gruesome process that was hidden from the public for decades. Desperate to get the mummy out and retrieve the treasures stuck to it, the team used hot knives. They sliced through the ancient linen wrappings and chiselled away at the jewels. In doing so, they completely dismembered the pharaoh's body. To get the golden mask off, they had to decapitate Tutankhamun. His arms and legs were severed. His torso was cut in half. Photos from the excavation show the grim reality. Tut's skull on a stick for documentation, his body literally in pieces. Once the treasures were free, the team crudely reassembled the body on a tray of sand and tried to glue it back together. This violent dismemberment was conveniently left out of Carter's official reports. It turns out the man who spent a decade searching for the boy king was the one who did the most damage to him. There was no need for a supernatural curse. The real desecration was a scientific procedure carried out in the name of discovery. The king, who had rested undisturbed for 3,300 years, was torn apart by the very people who made him famous. What do you think? Was it a supernatural curse, a string of awful coincidences, or something else entirely? Let us know your theories in the comments. And if you're enjoying our trip into the past, don't forget to subscribe and hit the notification bell so you never miss an excavation. For a century, the story of King Tut has been told in two different ways. One of dazzling treasure, the other of a deadly curse. The curse, with its spooky omens and dramatic deaths, was an irresistible tale, spun up by a sensationalist press and a public fascinated with the occult. But the science and the facts tell a more ordinary story. A look at the numbers shows most people connected to the tomb lived long, healthy lives. The most famous victims died of explainable causes, made worse by the medical standards of the 1920s. The tomb toxin and radiation theories are interesting but still debated. The curse, it seems, was mostly just a good story that got out of hand. But maybe there was a curse, a human one. The pressure for headlines created a myth that overshadowed the real history, and in the rush for fame and treasure, the boy king at the centre of it all suffered one final brutal indignity at the hands of his own discoverers. Perhaps the greatest irony is that Howard Carter, the man who... I woke up one morning and a profound, chilling dread settled over me. My mother, who I'd spoken to just yesterday, had been dead for a decade. I found her obituary, funeral photos, condolence cards, undeniable proof of a past I didn't live. Either I had slipped into a world where Mom passed in 2014, or my brain had irrevocably snapped. Tonight, we're not talking about abstract theories. We're talking to real people who swear they're living in the wrong universe, and the evidence some of them present is disturbingly good. The moment everything changed. Imagine your life shifting in an instant. For Fernando Valencia, it happened in 2016. He walked into his office and greeted the receptionist, but she looked at him like a ghost. Security escorted him out. HR told him he'd been terminated in 2012, 4 years ago, after a car crash left him comatose. The problem? Fernando remembered the last 4 years perfectly. He had the pay stubs to prove it. But when he looked closer, the company watermark was different and his ID didn't scan. He was in his office, but it wasn't his office anymore. Or consider Lena Kay, who logged into her Gmail to find 5 years of emails she never sent or received, acceptance letters to universities she never applied to, photos with roommates she'd never met, and order confirmations for items she didn't own. Her past had been rewritten, and she was the only one who noticed. These aren't sci-fi plots, they're stories from ordinary people who hit a glitch in reality. They call it a slide, a jarring transition to another version of reality. The most disturbing part is the hyper-specific detail of the mismatches. A scar that moves, a house painted a different colour, or a child insisting their father never wore glasses. It's these small discrepancies that make you question everything. Communities of these sliders on subreddits like r/parallel universe grow by thousands each year, with members desperately looking for a way back home. Why the Mandela effect is just the tip. Most of us know the Mandela effect from harmless examples, like remembering the Berenstain Bears as Berenstein. It's a quirky memory glitch, but when that glitch inserts traumatic events, like the deaths of loved ones, it becomes terrifying. In 2019, hundreds of New Zealanders vividly recalled a major earthquake in 2013, describing specific damage and details. Yet according to all seismic data, that earthquake never happened. Neuroscientist Dr. Donna Liu has shown that memory is reconstructive. Every time you recall an event, you resave a slightly altered version. This explains some variance in collective memory, but the Mandela effect isn't random drift. It's large groups of people giving the exact same wrong answer with unwavering confidence. Skeptics point to social reinforcement. Someone posts a false memory on Reddit and a false consensus spreads. This explains some milder effects, but it breaks down for memories that predate the internet. People born in the 1960s remember Berenstein long before any online forum existed to influence them. The parallel universe camp argues these aren't memory errors at all. They're crosstalk between nearby worlds. You aren't misremembering, you're remembering a different cosmos correctly. The physics you were never taught in school. The concept of parallel universes isn't just science fiction, it's a debated area of theoretical physics. In 1957, Hugh Everett III's many worlds interpretation (MWI) proposed that every quantum event causes the universe to split. Schrödinger's cat isn't alive or dead, it's alive in one universe and dead in another, with both being equally real. It's an infinitely branching tree of realities. Cosmologist Dr. Max Tegmark goes further, proposing a hierarchy of parallel universes where every mathematically possible structure exists as its own universe. This includes universes where the laws of physics are different. String theory introduces brane worlds, where our universe is a brane or slice floating near others in higher dimensions. If these branes were to touch, it could create a ripple, potentially allowing a memory or consciousness to leak through. Finally, inflationary cosmology suggests our universe is one of countless bubble universes, each with its own physical laws. While travel between them is thought to be impossible, the bizarre principle of quantum tunneling might allow for information and perhaps consciousness to hop between these realities. No experiment has confirmed this, but absence of evidence isn't evidence of absence. Living with a borrowed life. Imagine waking up next to a stranger you're supposedly married to. Your dog is now a cat. Your city apartment now overlooks a river that wasn't there yesterday. This was the reality for Chris P., a Canadian trucker who experienced months of crippling derealization, feeling like an imposter in his own life. Most experiencers don't want fame, they want coping strategies. Therapists often diagnose them with depersonalization or dissociative disorders, but medication only dulls the anxiety without fixing the disconnect. So they turn to each other in online groups, trading hacks for navigating their fractured realities. They keep reality journals, screenshot everything, and record date-stamped voice memos as anchors. The logic is terrifying. If they slide again, they'll have proof they aren't crazy. Some report multiple slides, with minor changes accumulating over time. They stop trying to convince others and live with a constant, exhausting vigilance. A fascinating minority, however, learns to embrace it, treating life like an endlessly shifting choose-your-own-adventure book. But building a stable life is nearly impossible when the ground beneath your feet is constantly rearranging itself. Can you slide on purpose? Online forums are filled with rituals for inducing a slide, from mirror gazing to manifestation grids. A dedicated few claim success. The common denominator seems to be a combination of extreme emotional intensity, focused intention, and a distinct environmental trigger like a flash of lightning or the thrum of an MRI. It's as if these moments crack open reality, allowing for a jump. Quantum physicist Dr. Yasunori Nomura speculates that consciousness itself might act as a measurement device, selecting an adjacent branch of the multiverse to inhabit. The catch: you can't control where you land. Some report precursor dreams, feeling like sneak previews of an alternate reality, only to wake up inside them weeks or months later. Even declassified CIA gateway documents from the 1980s explored using meditation and binaural beats to alter consciousness and resonate with other realities. The bottom line is there is no verified, repeatable method for sliding, and if you do try, be prepared. A go bag with a passport, cash, and a flash drive of your documents might be necessary. The skeptic's counterpunch. For every wild theory, there is a counterpunch. Memory is fallible. A 2015 study showed that 70% of volunteers recalled fabricated childhood events after just a gentle suggestion. Psychologist Elizabeth Loftus famously convinced people they'd met Bugs Bunny at Disneyland, an impossibility. If professionals can implant memories in a lab, imagine the power of Reddit threads and TikTok clips operating at scale. Occam's razor suggests the simplest explanation is usually correct. People misremember, and social media amplifies these errors into a false consensus. No multiverse required. Neurologically, many slider experiences can be explained by phenomena like déjà vu, jamais vu, and depersonalization. Conditions like temporal lobe epilepsy can also make the familiar feel foreign. Yet, even skeptics struggle with residue, physical evidence that contradicts current reality. The classic example is the Fruit of the Loom logo. Millions recall a cornucopia in the logo, which the company says never existed. But a 1973 trademark filing for the logo describes exactly that. This is where simple explanations start to buckle. Science demands repeatability. Until we can slide volunteers under lab conditions, parallel universes remain a hypothesis. But labeling every experiencer as delusional is intellectually dishonest. The wise stance is an agnostic one. Keep investigating without prejudgment. How to test if you're in the wrong world. Could you be living in a borrowed life? Here's a quick mental checklist. First, search, when did Nelson Mandela die? If you remember his death in prison in the 1990s, you're experiencing the classic Mandela effect. In this reality, he died in 2013. Next, check your anatomy. Are your kidneys above or below your ribcage? Many sliders recall them being higher, but in this reality, they sit lower toward your back. Check pop culture and branding. Is it Chick-fil-A or Chick-fil-A? Skechers or Skechers? Did the droid C-3PO have one silver leg, or were both gold? Geographically, is New Zealand northeast or southeast of Australia? For many, their mental map has shifted. To track slides, document everything, screenshot your phone's interface, record voice memos describing your surroundings, but beware of confirmation bias. Write down your prediction before you check the facts. Finally, if you discuss this, ask open-ended questions like, what do you recall about this jingle, to avoid implanting false memories. If you confirm a slide, stay calm. Panic clouds observation. Treat it like fieldwork. Note every detail and adapt. Tell me your story. Have you experienced something that made you question reality? A subtle, unsettling glitch in the Matrix? Drop your story in the comments below. I read every one, and the most compelling stories might get their own follow-up video. If you have photos, screenshots, or any residue from an alternate past, please share them. Let's crowd-solve this cosmic glitch. And if this is your first night in the wrong universe, you are not alone. Where do we go from here? We stand caught between what we swear was real and what the world insists is true. Are these discrepancies just psychological hiccups amplified by the internet? Or are we brushing sleeves with neighbouring realities? Science hasn't slammed the door. Many worlds and brain worlds allow for multiple versions of reality to exist. What we lack is a way to track consciousness across these shifts. Until then, these deeply personal, terrifying accounts remain our most compelling data. If you are unaffected by these shifts, treat these stories as a prompt to remember that memory is fragile and certainty is a luxury. Back up your photos and cherish your loved ones. And if you are affected, know this: questioning reality is not madness, it is the frontier of human curiosity. We may never definitively prove a slide, but every honest account chips away at the wall between the possible and the proven. Keep your eyes open and your mind willing to consider the impossible, because somewhere another version of you is watching this, wondering if they're the one who jumped. What if they came for your children, not in the dead of night, not with ski masks and a getaway van, but with a polite knock on the door, a professional suit, and a clipboard under their arm? They look official, they sound official, they say they're from social services, and they need to see your children, right now. And the chilling part, they know their names. For hundreds of families across the United Kingdom in the 1990s, this wasn't just a scary thought, it was a terrifying reality that kicked off a nationwide panic. This is the story of the phantom social workers, the massive police investigation they sparked, and how, after all these years, it's like they just vanished without a trace. It all started in the autumn of 1990. Across the UK, from the sprawling council estates of northern England to the quiet suburbs of the south, a pattern of bizarre and deeply unsettling encounters began to take shape. It almost always started the same way: a knock on the door, usually during the day. The people on the other side were consistently described as well-dressed and articulate, often a man and a woman working as a pair. They carried briefcases, wore smart suits, and spoke with an air of authority that was incredibly hard to question. They'd claimed to be social workers, there to investigate a supposed complaint of child neglect or abuse. The homeowners, most of whom were mothers at home with young kids, were suddenly thrown into a nightmare of confusion and fear. These visitors were unnervingly convincing. They often knew personal details like the names and ages of the children inside, and sometimes even which schools they went to. This didn't feel like a random visit. It felt targeted, personal, and deeply invasive. Their demand was always the same. They needed to come inside to conduct a physical examination of the children. They'd insist it was urgent, a matter of official protocol. For any parent, it's a horrifying scenario. You're being accused of something awful by people who look like they have the full weight of the government behind them. And yet, something felt off. When parents pushed back, when they asked for official identification, the phantoms would either show fake credentials or get flustered, making up excuses before leaving abruptly. In some instances, their behaviour was even bolder. There were reports of these imposters trying to physically take children from their homes, claiming they were being placed into care. One terrified mother in Rotherham reported that a woman tried to lead her 2-year-old son away, only stopping when the mother screamed for her husband. In another incident, a man told a mother he was there to inspect her daughter's bedroom for signs of abuse. When she refused to let him in, he just calmly walked away, leaving her shaken to her core. These weren't clumsy criminals, they were calm, collected, and methodical, which only made them more terrifying. As local newspapers started reporting on these strange encounters, the stories spread like wildfire. What first seemed like isolated incidents soon revealed themselves to be part of a much larger, seemingly coordinated phenomenon. Reports flooded in from dozens of towns and cities: Manchester, Nottingham, Sunderland, and even across Scotland. The media gave them a name: the Phantom Social Workers. The consistency in the descriptions was chilling. The smart clothes, the polite but firm demeanour, the specific knowledge of the families, it all pointed to a level of organisation that went far beyond a simple hoax. This sparked a moral panic across the nation. Parents were terrified. Who were these people? What could they possibly want? The most obvious and terrifying theory was that this was a sophisticated network of child abductors. The fear was real. Parents stopped letting their children play outside. They answered every knock at the door with a sense of dread. The very people meant to protect children, social workers, were now the face of a national nightmare. The media frenzy only amplified the terror. Tabloid headlines screamed about child-snatching gangs, feeding the public's deepest anxieties. Every new report, whether confirmed or just a rumour, added to the growing legend. The psychological toll was immense. Some women who reported these incidents were met with scepticism from authorities, who initially couldn't grasp the scale of what was happening. Some reported feeling gaslighted or dismissed, told they'd probably just misunderstood a visit from a real health worker. This only added to their trauma, leaving them feeling helpless and alone. The panic didn't just stay behind closed doors, it put legitimate social services in an impossible position. Real social workers, doing their vital job of protecting vulnerable children, were suddenly met with fear and hostility. They were refused entry into homes where children were genuinely at risk. The very system designed to prevent harm was being paralysed by these phantoms who had stolen its identity. The scare had managed to weaponise trust itself. As the number of reports surged into the hundreds, police forces across the country knew they were dealing with something serious. This wasn't just a string of local disturbances, it felt like a nationwide event. In response, South Yorkshire Police launched Operation Childcare in 1990. It grew into a massive investigation, eventually involving 23 separate police forces, making it one of the largest of its kind in British history. An incident room was set up with dozens of officers whose sole job was to catalogue and connect the hundreds of sightings pouring in from all over the UK. But the investigation was a nightmare from the very beginning. These phantoms left behind almost no physical evidence. They were ghosts. They didn't force their way into homes, so there were no fingerprints from a break-in. Their visits were brief, and they vanished as quickly as they appeared. The descriptions of them, while consistent in terms of dress and manner, were often too generic to create a useful composite sketch. They were just a man in a suit or a well-dressed woman. Operation Childcare looked into over 250 separate reports, but the deeper they dug, the more baffling the case became. Police struggled to substantiate most of the claims, attributing many to rumour or misunderstandings amplified by the climate of fear. However, investigators remained convinced that a core number of the reports were absolutely genuine. In fact, police stated that 2 of the cases were the genuine article, though they never publicly elaborated on which cases these were or what made them so certain. Despite the massive resources poured into the operation, police were stumped. They had no suspects, no arrests, and most importantly, no clear motive. Why would an organised group go to such elaborate lengths only to back down the second they were challenged? If their goal was abduction, they were failing spectacularly. It just didn't add up. By 1994, with no new leads and no arrests made, Both Operation Childcare and a similar unit in Scotland were quietly shut down. The phantoms had won. They had terrorised an entire nation and then simply melted away. With the official investigation closed and no one ever caught, the big question remains: who were the phantom social workers? Over the years, several theories have bubbled up, each trying to make sense of this unsettling mystery. The first and most sinister is that this really was a network of would-be child abductors. The idea here is that these individuals were scoping out potential targets, testing how secure homes were and how assertive parents might be. Maybe they were looking for vulnerable families or specific kinds of children. Their tactic of backing off when challenged could have been a smart way to gather information for a future attempt without getting caught. But the sheer scale of it, happening all across the country, makes it seem like an incredibly elaborate and risky plan. A second theory, pushed by some criminologists, suggests the culprits weren't abductors at all, but misguided vigilantes. In this version of events, they were self-appointed child abuse investigators who genuinely believed they were uncovering neglect. This might explain why they were so focused on inspections and their official seeming act. They weren't trying to steal children, but to save them, operating under their own twisted moral code. This theory makes sense of why they would leave when challenged by a confident parent. They had no real authority to back them up. A third, and maybe even more disturbing theory, is that the whole thing was a form of mass hysteria, a moral panic whipped up by media hype and social anxiety. This perspective suggests that a few real, isolated impersonation incidents were blown way out of proportion by rumour and sensational news coverage, creating a feedback loop of fear. In this paranoid climate, a door-to-door salesperson, a market researcher, or a mistaken visit from an actual official could easily be twisted into a terrifying encounter. It's been compared to modern urban legends like the Men in Black, where mysterious figures appear and vanish, leaving only confusion behind. While this theory explains the panic, it doesn't quite account for those core, credible reports that multiple police forces believed were genuine. And finally, there's the darkest possibility that it was all part of something far more organised and sinister than we can even guess. The truth is, we just don't know. And that's what makes this case so profoundly disturbing. The wave of phantom social workers faded away in the mid-1990s, just as mysteriously as it had started. Although isolated copycat incidents have been reported since, including a confirmed case in Gloucestershire in 2014, where a woman posing as a social worker examined a baby, the nationwide siege of fear was over. The perpetrators were never identified. Their motives remain a complete mystery. They knocked on doors, terrified families, and then vanished from history, leaving behind nothing but a legacy of fear and a story with no resolution. The fact that a group of people could organise on such a scale, cause a national panic, trigger a massive police investigation, and get away with it completely is perhaps the most terrifying part of all. They remain phantoms, a dark footnote in British criminal history. So I have to ask, what do you think was really happening here? Was it an organised abduction ring, misguided vigilantes, or a case of mass hysteria? Let me know your theories in the comments below. The story of the phantom social workers is a chilling reminder of how easily the fabric of trust in our society can be torn apart. It shows how quickly fear can spread and how some mysteries are never solved. They just leave us with a lingering sense of unease and one final, haunting question: who was knocking on the door? In 1845, a pair of the most cutting-edge ships of their era, HMS Erebus and HMS Terror, set sail into the formidable Arctic. Their mission: to finally chart the elusive Northwest Passage, a fabled shortcut through the top of the world. With a crew of 129 men and enough provisions to last a staggering 3 years, this wasn't just another voyage, it was the pinnacle of British naval ambition and exploration. These weren't just any ships, They were paragons of Victorian engineering. They were last sighted by European whalers in Baffin Bay in July of that year, brimming with confidence and hope. And then they simply vanished. For decades, the only whispers of what happened to these 129 souls came from hushed Inuit accounts of desperation, and chillingly, a single note discovered in a stone cairn detailing death and abandonment. We're going to break down what really happened in those final, horrifying moments of the Lost Franklin expedition. The dream, the British Empire at the height of its power, was absolutely captivated by the idea of the Northwest Passage. Imagine finding a maritime shortcut through the Arctic, shaving thousands of miles off the journey to Asia and planting the Union Jack on every icy outcrop along the way. It was a strategic and economic dream. Who better to lead such a monumental undertaking than Sir John Franklin? At 59 years old, he was a seasoned Navy man, a veteran of polar expeditions, and, let's be honest, he was also pretty famous for getting into sticky situations on previous trips. But the Admiralty, pushing for this prestigious discovery, handed him the magnificent HMS Erebus and HMS Terror. These weren't just any vessels, they were bomb-proof wooden warships, already proven tough in the Antarctic ice. They spared no expense. They bolted on a steam engine to Erebus, a marvel of industrial technology for its time, and reinforced the hulls with iron plating. The ships were loaded with an astonishing 2,500 tins of soup, 5,000 books, a 3,000 volume library, and even a pet monkey to keep spirits high. Confidence was sky high back home. Newspapers gushed, calling it the best provisioned expedition in history. What could possibly go wrong, right? This wasn't just exploration, it was a grand statement of British might, technology, and sheer will against nature. They believed they had thought of everything. First winter. By September 1845, the expedition had indeed made significant progress, but then they encountered the inevitable. They became locked in the unforgiving pack ice northwest of King William Island. Instead of succumbing to panic, which many might expect, the crew settled in for the long dark winter. They maintained morale with hunting parties, theatrical plays staged on the ice, and a sense of shared purpose. Things seemed, at least outwardly, to be going rather well. They even carved a message on a copper sheet, tucked it into a stone cairn, essentially saying, "All good, see you next summer." Summer 1846 eventually arrived, bringing with it a brief thaw. The ice loosened its grip, and the ships managed to push further south. But this was a cruel trick of the Arctic. They sailed straight into a choke point, a treacherous area of ice that would never truly open again. The ships froze in for a second brutal winter. Still, no major alarms were sounding among the crew. The canned food, while perhaps tasting a bit metallic, was being consumed, but nobody connected the dots yet. The initial optimism, a hallmark of Victorian exploration, hadn't yet fully eroded, but the subtle seeds of disaster were already being sown. The dominoes start to fall. Here's where the story takes a grim turn, and the grand plans of the British Empire began to unravel. The state-of-the-art tinned food meant to sustain them became a silent killer. The lead solder used to seal those cans was constantly leaching into the stew, the vegetables and the meat. Day by day, the crew was unknowingly dosing themselves with a neurotoxin. Lead poisoning causes a terrifying array of symptoms, dulling judgment, causing extreme weakness, wrecking kidneys, and leading to debilitating pain and bleeding gums. Imagine trying to navigate complex decisions or perform strenuous tasks while suffering from such severe internal distress. The lead levels found in the remains of crew members were alarmingly high, sometimes 20 times higher than normal, indicating acute poisoning. For instance, John Torrington, a stoker, had lead concentrations up to 226 parts per million in his bones, vastly exceeding normal levels. But that wasn't all. Scurvy, the ancient scourge of sailors, crept in insidiously. The lime juice, intended as an anti-scorbutic, had lost its vitamin C long ago due to poor preservation and storage. Scurvy leads to profound fatigue, spongy, bleeding gums, loose teeth, and old wounds reopening. It makes you weak, prone to bruising, and can even cause delusions and depression. Add to this the rampant infectious diseases, tuberculosis, which which was a major cause of death in the 19th century and would have spread rapidly in the close quarters of the ships, and pneumonia. Some evidence even points to botulism from a bad batch of canned kidneys. It was a perfect storm of medical disasters. Suddenly, half the crew was coughing blood, too weak to stand, or mentally incapacitated. In April 1848, the unimaginable had happened. 20 officers and men were already dead, including Sir John Franklin himself. The remaining survivors, now under the command of Captain Crozier, scribbled a new, desperate note. It read, "Ships deserted, 105 souls, under command of Captain Crozier, start tomorrow for Back River." They folded it, crammed it back into the same cairn, and marched into an icy, desolate nowhere. This decision to abandon the ships, despite having food, was likely driven by the severe illness and weakness plaguing the men. The Death March. The march was nothing short of a living nightmare. Imagine dragging heavy whaleboats laden with what they considered essential supplies, silverware, Bibles, and even chocolate, across treacherous gravel and snow. They were covering perhaps 5 miles a day, if they were lucky. Their fingers, exposed to the biting cold, blackened from frostbite, shoulders dislocated under the crushing weight of their burdens. As their strength waned, they began to discard precious items, first the silver plates, then medical cabinets, and finally, it seems, all hope. Inuit hunters later recounted haunting tales of gaunt, desperate men falling on their faces in the snow. One small group, clinging to a sliver of hope, managed to reach the southern shore of King William Island and tried to construct a makeshift driftwood raft. But the merciless currents of the Arctic spun them in helpless circles. Starvation gnawed at them. They ate raw seal meat, then they gnawed on their leather boots, and in the final, horrific stages, they resorted to cannibalism. Forensic teams in the 1990s, examining bones recovered from the region, found undeniable evidence: defleshing cut marks and skulls, cracked open from the inside, clear signs of this ultimate desperation. The last man likely died wondering why the very food meant to save him had killed him quicker than starvation. The search industry back home, the disappearance sparked a national obsession. Lady Jane Franklin, Sir John's indomitable wife, refused to accept defeat. She personally bankrolled 7 different rescue missions, turning her husband into a national martyr and a symbol of British heroism. Literary giants like Charles Dickens penned melodramatic articles, fueling public fascination and grief. The Royal Navy, spurred by public outcry and national pride, even offered a colossal reward of £20,000, equivalent to millions today, for any news of the expedition. In 1850, searchers finally found the graves of 3 crewmen on Beechey Island. These bodies, including that of John Torrington, were perfectly preserved in the permafrost, their faces still eerily capped by frost. It was a chilling first clue. 9 years later, in 1859, another team located the Victory Point note, the same one left by Crozier, which became the only official document ever recovered. For 150 years, that scrap of paper was the closest thing to an eyewitness account of the tragedy. Meanwhile, Inuit stories of a dead white camp and encounters with starving men were largely dismissed by Victorian society as mere savage rumours, often due to prevailing racial prejudices. It wasn't until archaeologists began to meticulously match every detail of these oral histories with physical evidence that the immense value and accuracy of Inuit traditional knowledge finally came to light. Finding the ghost ships fast, forward to 2014, after decades of renewed searches, often guided by those very Inuit oral histories that had been ignored for so long, a breakthrough finally occurred. A Parks Canada team, acting on an Inuit tip about a wooden island in Queen Maud Gulf, deployed side-scan sonar. What they found was astonishing. A perfect hull sitting upright in 36 feet of water. It was HMS Erebus. The discovery sent shockwaves around the world. Just 2 years later, in 2016, local Inuit hunter Sami Kogvik pointed searchers to Terror Bay. There, resting on the seafloor, was HMS Terror, remarkably well preserved. Its helm was still threaded through its rail, cabin windows intact, and dinner plates stacked as if the officers might return for dessert at any moment. It was a ghost ship, frozen in time. While no human remains were found inside either wreck, hundreds of artifacts have been recovered from Erebus, offering a poignant glimpse into the crew's final days. Scientific instruments, silk slippers, a sealed medical bottle still full of morphine. These objects tell a silent story of a crew that left in haste and never came back. The wrecks are now jointly managed by Parks Canada and the Inuit Heritage Trust, a fitting recognition of the critical role Inuit knowledge played in solving this enduring mystery. What killed them, really? So, with all this information, what truly killed them? Modern forensic work on the bodies exhumed from Beechy Island, such as John Torrington, showed lead levels 3 times the toxic threshold. This wasn't just a contributing factor, it was a devastating assault on their physical and mental well-being. Imagine the cumulative effect. Chronic lead poisoning causing neurological symptoms like confusion and poor decision-making, alongside physical weakness. Add to this a crippling zinc deficiency, the relentless advance of scurvy and tuberculosis-driven adrenal collapse, which would have led to severe dehydration and wasting even if food was available. Picture a sailor too weak to stand, too confused to hunt or navigate, and too cold to sleep, his body slowly disintegrating from within. Multiply that terrifying scenario by 129 men. The ships were never crushed, a popular theory for years. They simply froze in place, becoming inescapable prisons until the crew, in their weakened state, walked away, unable to free them. Inuit testimony even suggests the last living sailor may have been shot trying to steal seal meat, a tragic final act that, by that point, might have been a grim mercy. Ultimately, the most technologically advanced polar expedition of its era vanished due to a tragic confluence of factors. Bad cans, bad luck, and perhaps bad assumptions about the sheer, unforgiving power of the Arctic. The wrecks have been found, the bones have spoken their silent truths, and the artifacts recovered whisper tales of their last moments. Yet, the story still claws at us. 129 people who followed orders straight into an ice maze and never found the exit. It's a stark reminder of human ambition clashing with the brutal realities of nature. If you want to dive deeper into this incredible saga, I've left a list of books and podcasts in the description below. Smash that like button if you learned something grim today, subscribe for more forgotten disasters, and comment below. Would you rather face lead poisoning or polar bears? Stay curious, stay kind, and for goodness sake, don't trust 3-year-old canned mutton.